Hi, my name is still Roby, and this is already the 6th video in the series of 8 about making exhibitions. I described in the previous video how we went from one activity to another and how the Amsterdam Library was one of the first to start renting our exhibitions for children. Let's go back to then. Those days you got a visa at the embassies. They also did a lot of cultural promotion. Well, that's now getting out of the picture, but don't despair. In a while, many foreign ministries will start to understand again how incredibly important culture is for business. In the past, in a number of countries, the Netherlands had Dutch institutes where the top of Dutch art and culture was presented. An important center was the Institut Néerlandais in Paris, and in 1990 this institute brought an overview exhibition about Dutch children books. The most important institution that could put together such a large exhibition at that time was the Amsterdam Library. A delegation from Paris had to come to Amsterdam to prepare the exhibition. They were going to present books and other material on shelves in the lower part of the exhibition rooms. Above, it will hang full of original illustrations. Well, here you can see the floor plan of the institute, and as you can see, a total of 100 meters of wall and no windows. Because original illustrations are not that large, even with only 2 on top of each other, about 400 to 500 works will be needed. The Amsterdam Library told them that they had to come to our place in Axel, which is a very tiny town in the center of the Netherlands. Well, of course, they didn't believe it. And instead they went to all kinds of museums, but none could provide such a large amount of framed work. So after some months they finally came to Axel, and yes, we could deliver. Because, as I mentioned in the previous video, due to a donation I had a machine and a material to make hundreds of frames. We also had already 1,000 of original artworks donated by hundreds of children's books illustrators. That was not surprising because we were the only ones who made art exhibitions for children, and illustrators liked it better when their work was on a display rather than aging in a cupboard somewhere. So that exhibition in Paris was supposed to be held in December, and that didn't suit us because that's the busiest time in a bookshop. So to see the exhibition place, we went to Paris in the summer. I took a lot of pictures in the space. I also walked around to feel the atmosphere and to see what visitors see when they come from one room to the other. Back in Axel I got to work. I made a simple model, and by using my intake material I was able to build the entire exhibition in my office. So this is a somewhat long introduction to the theme of this video, the intake. I was able to work this way because from a certain period I started photographing and describing every work that came in. In the early years I unfortunately did not always do that, and that's a pity. The reason for not doing this had everything to do with the costs of making pictures. I could develop and print black and white photos myself, but color was a lot more difficult. And it took a while before a good quality digital photography became affordable. Today the situation has changed to such an extent that it's actually unwise not to photograph everything that comes in for an exhibition. Without having the pictures and the description, I would never have been able to make a good exhibition. From the library in Amsterdam I got information about what they will present in Paris. With the help of my own descriptions which I had made at the intake, I was able to make a good selection that fitted in well with their material. The intake is a moment it all really starts. Sometimes we have already fully worked out the plans for an exhibition, sometimes only in broad outline. But in all situations you can only get started when you have the physical work in-house. That is why for me the realization of an exhibition starts with intake, when the physical work comes in. There are several reasons why the intake has to be prepared so incredibly well. In the first place, to check whether what should be delivered has also been delivered. So How does the intake go? We also always start with checking the packages. Is there any damage at first sight or hearing? In addition, take pictures and make a short video. You will need them also when you prepare the work for sending back. Next, check whether you can safely remove the packaging, especially when you need to cut something open. You won't be the first one who cut in an artwork, because you're going to make several pictures. It is important at this stage whether the owner of the work has given permission to take the pictures of the work and what they may be used for. Well, assuming that you have that permission, what kind of information is interesting to collect? First and foremost, just very practical information. You have already the description of the photo and the photo of the packing. In addition to this, the following information is relevant. Exact description of the work, the technique, the measurements, the weight. Check and describe the framing and the hanging system of the artworks. Describe vulnerable parts. Is there any damage? Are there any storage or transport conditions? What to do in case of damage? Some practical information due to the exhibition. You also need how long will it hang? When will it be hung? Who takes care for the sending the work back to the owner? And then you will need the information needed for the catalog and press information, the history of the work, the creator's story, and so on. As my accountant had taught me, the more posts you have, the better. And certainly for the insurance, you need a lot of information. And the better the information, the easier it's to obtain compensation in the event of damage. So you make a copy of all this information for the owner of the work and ask them to let you know that they agree with the descriptions or not. It all seems quite obvious, but unfortunately, it's another difficult word, especially in smaller company, this is rarely done. There are usually a few reasons why the intake is often performed so poorly. People are so enthusiastic about the work, they first want to enjoy it. And then making an exhibition is based on trusting each other. And that's the right attitude. However, not only can a situation change for all kinds of reasons, sometimes third parties are also involved. For example, the carrier, and they also need good information. Then there is poor time planning resulting in too little time, and sometimes the intake is not considered important and left it to, yes, to whom? Well, as soon as you have the basic information, it's good to make a nice presentation to the bank. You might not be aware that your bank is monitoring what is going on at your account. And when they see something unusual, they have to report it. And in their fight against money laundering, it may happen that they might suddenly block your account. In the Netherlands, banks are legally obliged to act in this way. And I guess that's an international approach, although not publicly known. To avoid a very unpleasant experience, it might be a good idea to inform your bank of your plans in a good time. Ask them right away if they want to place an advertorial in the upcoming catalog, so then the visit has more purposes. Yes, well, it's quite a bit of administration, especially when you are going to exhibit internationally. And now some will immediately respond that state that they will never exhibit internationally. I had the same idea when I started. I just wanted to put a different exhibition in my gallery every month. I didn't even dream about international exhibitions, which is why my own administration was very limited in the beginning. But how our company develops, it's not always in our control. On a certain moment, one of the artists you work with a lot comes with a request. They have received an invitation to participate in an international art fair in another country. But they have no experience with that at all, or it comes on a bad wrong moment like I had with the exhibition in Paris. And since the artists actually only work with your gallery, they come to you, and when you then state that you are not interested in becoming active abroad, well, they will go to someone else, and there's a good chance that you will lose one of your artists. You can also consider, it's quite interesting to see how such an international fair works. Besides, you will also be reimbursed for your travel and accommodation costs. So, well, next is that other artists will hear that you did this so well, and they also come along with the same question. Of course, you only want to work with the artists that you represent in your gallery. And with a few interesting artists, you can make a good deal. That's how it can go. So, when the opportunity arises to exhibit abroad, you have to deal with a lot of administration. The intake for international exhibition is somewhat more extensive. However, when you start with a good intake administration, it won't be a problem. In principle, the artists themselves provide the required and sometimes verified information. This data is necessary for the transport, the import and export, the necessary permissions and the insurance. As soon as you have received all the information, you can check whether the material you are going to send will not cause problems with customs. This differs per country, and not unimportant, re-entering material in your own country can also cause problems. Based on what needs to be transported, you have to divide the work over different transport boxes, and that must be well documented. Works that might give extra work at the customs, you send in a separate batch. The same for very fragile works. You have to do this kind of work before they send the work to you. Because with this information you can calculate the transport costs more precisely, and that can be important for participating artists. There might be an artist that decide not to participate, or with other work. You can calculate it all again. When you work for a government, you can ask for a bit more money, but when you have your own business, as I do, then you have to foresee this kind of problems when you make your budget. So then objects will arrive in your place, and then the real work starts. What about the material that is sent? Does it correspond to the information provided by the artist? They might have changed it a bit, supposing that it does matter, but it does. So the work must be well described, including any shortcomings. To hang a few paintings in a local coffee shop, the work can be done a bit different. In such a case, you can often take the artwork with you as normal luggage. But for an exhibition in a museum or a public space, the materials must be officially imported, and each country has its own conditions. For many countries, customs only check material matters. For example, that certain animal or vegetable products may not be important, even if it is a brush. Then you only need a customs overview that must state what is in which box. In case the customs do not check which images are involved, you might find out when the exhibition opens that there are interest groups getting very angry because of what is exhibited. In fact, this can also happen in your own country or even in your own place. It happens in all countries. Fanatics love art exhibitions to showcase their points of view. Sometimes they glue themselves to the work of art, but even more often they want the works to be removed. As an exhibitor, yeah, it's a good word, or an exhibition maker, you can already see at the intake whether additional information material is active or action is required. Well, in Vietnam this is not likely to happen, because partly the Vietnamese have a lot of respect for other opinions, but also very practical, because all the work have to be reviewed in advance. not by customs but by a special committee. You therefore have to provide different information for that committee, different than for the customs. In the first video in this series I already give an example of a dramatic consequence if the carrier does not take this into account. So to illustrate, this is the information I had to make for the meeting point exhibition in Ho Chi Minh City. As you can see, the first list doesn't look like a lot of work. But if we then look further, we see that for each work, every artist must provide legitimate information about themselves with a stamp from the municipality where the passport was issued. And that information is then legitimized by the Vietnamese embassy. Next, there must be an overview of where the artist had already exhibited, and so on and so on. As you can see, is a lot of paperwork. If the list in front get the approval stamps, then that list and all the documents are added to the map with the descriptions that you have to make for the customs and transport. I also used the customs list to check the artwork that was brought from the customs to the museum, because that list indicates the amount and the format of the boxes. Just like for the exhibition in Paris, I went to view and photograph the spaces in Ho Chi Minh City well and in advance. Some rooms had large windows. If you close them, it will get very hot in those rooms. But when they are open, a lot of daylight can come in, and not all the work can handle that. I also took pictures of the lighting, the suspension system, but also of the sockets and the conditions they are. And while walking around, I saw how visitors behave, and that is an important information. Let me explain this. Objects stand in space, as it were, between the visitors. When you see how people move around in a room, you can also see where you can safely place objects. In addition, each country has its own rules for safety reasons. So you can have sometimes you have to know them, because sometimes it looks like there is a lot of place. And we often think that we can put something in the middle of that large empty space because there's so much free space. However, but in case of a lot of smoke development, you don't see that free space, and that is why you are not allowed to put anything anywhere in some places in a room, even though there is a lot of space there. So there is a corridor and you cannot put things in it. How and where you can place object is information you need when you are doing the intake or before. And some floors you are not allowed to place certain things, and it's useful not to discover this when you are already there with your work. So over the years we usually gain a lot of experience and we know what to expect. And I have especially learned that good preparation prevents many surprises. So I would like to conclude this video with a not unimportant point about glass. Glass can break both during intake and during transport and must then be replaced. There are two important aspects regarding to the nature of glass, and that one should always pay attention to. First of all, there is an important feature that glass is razor sharp. You lose a part of your finger and then there are red spots on the work that don't belong there. On location, you rarely have the safe working table and the place that you have at home. Therefore, make sure you always have sandpaper with you. Go along the edges of the glass with the sandpaper, and if you do it properly and carefully, you will no longer cut yourself. Secondly, glass is very strong on the one hand, but cannot bend more than 6% on the other. If you bend more, you can see what the artist René van Halderen has beautiful portrayed that will happen. It's usually the own weight of the glass that causes that breakage. But it's also possible that the glass plate has a slightly damaged, and then it can go very quickly hands, and then so never lift glass horizontally from the sides. Well, more detailed information you find on our Patreon site, also the place to ask questions and learn from others. The next video will be about activities during and after the exhibition. Thank you for watching.